like to call the Lakewood portion of the joint meeting between the Lakewood City Council and the Clover Park School District Board for Monday, January 28th to order.
Yes, and it's my privilege as the president of the Clover Park School District to be able to officially acknowledge that we have started or begun our joint meeting as well, so at 7 p.m.
And so we now call on the city clerk to call the council roll.
Councilmember Barth. Present. Councilmember Boki. Present. Councilmember Brandstetter. Here. Councilmember Moss. Here. Councilmember Simpson. Here. Deputy Mayor Whalen. Present. Mayor Anderson.
Here.
We have a quorum.
And let it be known that the Clover Park School District has all of our directors here, and we are especially pleased to see Alyssa here tonight as well. So it's good to have you back after your leave, so thank you.
So, welcome. Thank you for joining us here tonight in our chambers. The first item of information and discussion regards the Lakewood City Property Plan. And I understand that School Board Member Paul Wagaman will report on this.
I will. And so you know that it's vacant property. It's 9.5 acres. Oh, very good. Yeah, there's 9.5 acres over there in Lake City property that's kind of fenced off and not being used for anything at this point in time. This property is needed in case we need to add a school. We don't have any other property where we could put a school at this point in time, so that's the piece there. Our Facilities Advisory Committee that's reviewed this several times, recommends that we keep it as a place that we can expand into in the future. And the committee recommended just retain that property to meet our future growth. And so we don't know where that's all going at this point in time, but that's where that property is. And I guess the only thing I would add is, there's always a possibility, since that land's vacant and you're looking for park space and those kind of things, if we put some kind of joint thing together that's also on this agenda tonight, that might be something to consider. But that's all I have on that.
Mr. Brandstetter.
Well, I certainly don't have all those answers, Mike, but you want to look at the liability issue of if you have somebody on there gets hurt, then what happens? So if let's just make an assumption that we made it into a park that could be used until future time that we need to put a building on it. What would that look like? Well, it's pretty open grass. We have lots of grass around here. What's the liability for the parks and stuff that we're using now? So those are some things. The nice thing that's over there is it has that one covered area that, I think there's some basketball hoops if I'm not mistaken. And I remember my kids used to go down there and play roller hockey in that covered space that's still there. But that's basically the only thing on the property other than fences. And then, and then the other thing is if it's being used for something, who's going to pay for the maintenance? Would that still rest with the school district, or would that be somebody else that's going to use the thing? So how do we pay for those things is always a concern.
Has there been any discussion among the school board as to potential interim uses?
No, we haven't approached interim uses yet, and so we knew we were having this meeting as well. And then along that line too is that Paul kind of referred to, is that with the new state mandated class sizes, we know that it's inevitable that we need another elementary school. We're building them larger now. And so the Facility Advisory Committee's work was very clear that this is going to be a requirement just to meet current enrollment. And so it's not even banking it, it's designating it because we know it's going to need to happen. It's the when that we're unaware of. And so I think as we get closer to understanding some of the when, we might be able to have better conversations on what we can do, because if it's 2 years, then that's, I don't know how much energy people want to put into it, but we are certainly looking into that and following the Facility Advisory Committee's recommendations.
Ms. Barth.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There we go. So the comments that I've heard just being out in the community, specifically about the Lake City property, the citizens out there feel that they have paid the taxes and that they should have use of the fields, even just to walk their dogs or to let the kids play, kick a ball around. And so I am just repeating, yeah, it's all fenced now, so you can't do it. But their comments to me, they believe that they should be able to do that. And so what I'm hearing from you, Paul, is cost of insurance, who's responsible if something does happen. And I appreciate that, but looking at it from the citizen's point of view, they believe they pay for the school district to operate, and so that's school district property. It should be able to be used by the folks. So just I'm not saying that I agree or disagree, but I'm repeating what I've heard. And, you know, I mean, back in our day, we used to be able to go to the Clover Park, use the track, Mount Tahoma, use the track, lakes, use the track. Now all of those places are closed off for people. You can't do it on, you know, and people's comment is it's their money that's funded those things, and they should be able to use them. So just tossing it out there.
Well, I don't know what comments to make on that other than that. For me personally, I agree with that. We as a board haven't talked about how to do some of the joint uses. I mean, we're working on our community engagement leadership team, the CELT process, and I think there's a whole lot of positive things there. And if you go back in the history of our nation, the school building was kind of the local community meeting place. You know, the question is how do we do that? And you know, our problem is that every day we have to have school there. So if the facility is used for something else, then that can detract from that. But certainly the citizens have paid for it. We're just the stewards of that property. So, you know, how do we make that happen? We have agreements in our policies to allow people to rent spaces. So churches use some of our spaces and other organizations use those. But we just need to put our heads together and, you know, and again, I'm not trying to make an agreement for our board yet because we haven't come, but I think if we have that discussion, there's certainly, we should be able to do something.
Well, okay, so I'm asking you, when you do have that discussion, to please include the comments and go out to the community and hear what they say. Go to some of the neighborhood association meetings. There's some folks here from, I'm seeing heads nodding. Go out there and listen to what they're saying, but it's a shame that we can't get back to the basics of community and using the facility, whether it's got a building on it or whether it's got grass on it, but being able to use that as part of our community.
I think you'll see when we get to the safety side as well, Marie, that it is unfortunate because there was a day that when I was a child, that you had access to schools. Now you have fences, now you have lanyards to be able to scan to go in. It is, unfortunately, it is a different world that we have to work at. The fences and things are restrictive, and yet they're also protective. So there are some things that we have to maneuver as a priority of just keeping our children safe too. So that makes buildings a little bit less accessible to the public. So we just have to work harder and more innovative at it. So we hear that.
Well, I just ask you to keep it in mind when you do have a discussion about it.
Yeah, the bare land isn't a significant liability issue for the city and its parks because of the limited immunity that's involved in recreational property in the open space. So for the most part, they're open. I might suggest trying to avoid unintended consequences, that if it does have some modest improvement and looks like a park, that it also come with a sign that says future site of a Clover Park School District grade school, so that the people who use it don't get accustomed to it and expect it to be a permanent park. So,
Good point.
any other comments, questions? Well,
hopefully something we can talk about when we get down.
yeah, well, we can talk about that more in the joint use and to show you how the Lakewood City Council successfully avoids having to prepare for presentations. Ours are delegated. We move to the city comprehensive plan, for which we have Mr. Buer, Assistant City Manager.
That talks about the comprehensive plan process for 2019. Amendments are only allowed once a year under Washington state law. There is a total of 13 amendments that are being proposed this year.
Hey, Dave, I don't think the... Yeah, we have. We have them? They're in there?
Ours are on our pad then.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
We're good.
There are 13 amendments proposed this year. Of the 13, they are a combination of map amendments, text amendments. Some of them are privately initiated. Some of them are initiated by the City Council. And some of them have been initiated by city staff with approval from the City Council. They are significant. They cover lots of different topics. They talk considerably about potential changes in industrial zoning in the Woodbrook area. One of those proposals includes the Clover Park School District piece that's located on Murray Road. There's also another amendment that the city is initiating that would change the designations of the residential properties adjacent to those areas also to industrial. And then just a little bit away, probably a quarter of a mile, there's also another proposal for zone change to industrial uses on, I believe it's maybe 146th. The city is also looking at making some changes to its public institutional text. There are a considerable number of public institutional uses in the city of Lakewood. Many of those are owned and operated by the Clover Park School District. What we're looking at is looking at the text as it relates to public institutional uses, specifically addressing master plan requirements in the reuse and or vacant unused buildings and structures. The draft language is pending, and I will be working with Mr. Ring on finalizing that as it gets closer to a public hearing process. The public hearings on these amendments start in late April before the Planning Commission. They will be brought forward to the City Council in late May. That's the anticipated schedule. The public hearing before the council, again, the Clover Park School District can provide comments. After that, the council takes action. Then there's an appeal process, and after that, the changes come into effect. And that's a very brief thumbnail of the process for 2019.
Could you point out the amendments which would directly affect the district?
Yes. The one that's directly affecting the district is CPA Zoning Ordinance Amendment 2019-04. And then the ones that are affecting the property surrounding that is 05. And then the text amendment is 2019-11. And there's a table as a part of the memorandum that outlines the applicants and the summary of the proposal.
Can you put the picture up?
Can we put the picture up?
The parcels.
The parcels? Okay, hold on just a second. Go to 04. Yes, this is the one that's existing public institutional that belongs to the school district. It contains just one parcel. The rest of the area is previously zoned industrial business park that belongs to the Clover Park School District. So the large area of the Woodbrook Middle School has already been designated. This is a sort of a passed over parcel that we are fixing to include as a part of the industrial designation. If we go to 05, next page, what you see on this map are the residential single-family parcels to the north and south of the Clover Park School District property, which is in the middle, that are also being proposed to industrial business park. The existing residential uses would become non-conforming uses.
And could you explain the significance of the text amendment?
The text amendment is significant in the sense that we have language in place that's been in place since 2005. What it does is it speaks to the master planning process for all public institutional properties greater than 20 acres in size. You have master plan agreements in place for your larger school facilities already, so I'm not anticipating any real change. You have them for Lakes High School. You have one for Hutloff, and anywhere you have proposed major expansions to school facilities, they are already there. I'm not anticipating any issues there. We're primarily looking at other public institutional properties belonging to the state of Washington, either with Pierce College, Western State Hospital, or Clover Park Technical College, or the hospital, St. Clair Hospital, where you could potentially see reuses of buildings, and particularly buildings that would be reused but not removed. Large buildings not in use potentially create a whole series of issues for the city of Lakewood. A good example is the QFC property located at Gravy Lake in Bridgeport. That piece of property has until January 30th to submit building permits and fix the current facility, or we begin the process of dangerous building abatement. So one of the policies of the City Council is to remove buildings that are not in use, to make sure that they are reused and provide for redevelopment opportunity in Lakewood that improves the city's overall tax base.
Questions for Mr. Buer, Mr. Branstetter?
Yeah, Mr. Buer, and I understand you're focused on the 2019 process, but could you touch on the downtown plan that we approved just recently and how that's going to affect residential density and perhaps the geographic dispersion of school-age folks, where we program there to be more density in an area that heretofore had little.
In 2018, the comprehensive plan amendments and zoning amendments that the council authorized were for what's referred to as the downtown plan. And that comprises approximately 400 to 500 acres in the downtown, where previously we have allowed up to a maximum density of 54 units per acre. The new plan will allow for a density up to 100 units per acre, and that will cover the city's density requirements under the Growth Management Act for quite a period of time. So as that plan takes off, and we're beginning to see some commercial development already, that is going to have some significant impacts upon the school district as that development takes place, because at 100 units per acre, that is a significant increase in population. Currently, most apartment complexes are being built in the past at around 18 to 24 units per acre. We are now getting applications up to 42. You will now be seeing them up to 100. So you could potentially see an increase in your student population that will affect your elementary schools and your high school in the downtown area.
Yeah, I would also point out that the plan is structured to encourage mixed use. So in areas, as you know, where we're looking for the ground floor use to be retail or commercial or offices or things like that, you know, we're looking for higher stories to actually have residential use in it. And I know from our past meetings that shifting the density of the population in the city is well, the school board has to use calculus to figure out where the lines between all the schools are, I guess. But, you know, should be aware that we're doing it. And at the same time, I guess that it would point out that within the zoning amendments, there is the loss of residential acreage in Woodbrook and in Tillicum, based on the proposed amendments that are there. You know, both of which are all in the same footprint of a single elementary school. So, you know, we just wanted to, I guess I wanted to point out that we don't have a crystal ball about the timeline of when those shifts will happen, although I think the loss of the residential property in Woodbrook and Tillicum, if the Tillicum amendment is approved, would occur pretty quickly, as those are the things that people want to develop commercially or industrially. And I don't know how frequently do you all review the boundary line issue?
So just, I guess for your benefit, kind of an overview of what our pressures are with respect to redevelopment, because Lakewood's in a redevelopment mode. Under the Growth Management Act, there's significant pressure from above for us to accommodate future residential growth. They set artificial population targets, and in order to get your plans approved and to get contingent grant funding, like for transportation, you have to have plans approved. You have to accommodate that. This planning for the Central Business District Downtown Sub-Area Plan helps provide that by going vertical. The challenges, in addition to having some pretty low density development in Tillicum and Woodbrook removed from the inventory of property that can be redeveloped, is that north of the McCord runway, on the Tacoma side of the freeway, the air corridor over there has a non-conforming area where think of it as a big rectangular swath up toward Tacoma and kind of with the swap meet as what would be the northwest corner. That area, all the residential in that area is non-conforming, and so it can't be redeveloped. You can't build an infill house. You can't put an apartment building in there. So that's land that the Growth Management powers that be see as within Lakewood, but it's really being removed from the inventory, so we're put at a disadvantage in that regard. At the same time, we have some tax incentives available in particular areas for multifamily, where you can avoid tax on the improvement value for a number of years, but we're cautious about using that. this council's policy on that is if, let's see, in a nutshell, it might be, it's a consensus. It's not, it's discretionary with every applicant. But what we really like to see is somebody replacing something bad with something good, like happened at Fur Acres, where the new apartment complex is going in toward McCorgate and Springbrook, where that was probably some of the worst housing in the county at one time, and now it's going to be better quality apartments. So that county or the city decided would merit a tax incentive, but just putting another multifamily in, knock one out, really isn't in our wheelhouse for granting that tax exemption. If somebody has an entitlement to it and is in the proper zone, they can go ahead and build it, but we aren't going to necessarily encourage that with a tax incentive. We're trying to encourage what's really missing in Lakewood, which is an adequate quantity of middle-class housing. We have a lot of housing on each end. We don't have the bell curve that most communities have. We have something that's more like a barbell. And so, and we have a 60-40 rental to single-family ownership ratio, and usually it's the other way around. So we're out of whack, and we want to normalize that to the extent we can by policy, which is particularly difficult given that we don't build anything and we don't own any property. But to the extent we can tweak it around the edges, we're trying to do that. And one thing that's, just personal commentary, one thing that's encouraging with this legislative session is the Housing First kind of initiative that's going on, and their willingness to undertake condominium liability reform. If you'll notice, you get a lot of apartments, but nobody's building condominiums. That's because the liability scheme in Washington is so unfavorable to developers. And so the consortium that's come together seems to be advancing kind of a consensus liability reform in this year's legislature, which may be that entry-level housing, entry ownership housing piece that's kind of missing in Lakewood if we can go vertical with modestly priced condominiums. So all that in one way or another affects the enrollment of Clover Park School District. We don't see any huge spike in additional units at this point by encouraging just cookie cutter apartments. So. Mr. Whalen.
Just to follow up on that briefly with Mr. Buer here, could you describe the process that you folks are going through to develop the buildable lands report? I know through the Planning Commission we're working on that, and that will ultimately come to the council. Can you describe kind of where that is, what we hope it to reflect, and how it may be of help to the board in its strategic long-term planning with regard to potential densities, available housing in the city, and how that might translate into population numbers?
Okay. Under the Growth Management Act, we are required to do a buildable lands report. The city of Lakewood and all of the cities in the county, and including Pierce County. And so we are currently in the process of collecting all the data. The data is due the end of February, and that looks at the number of new short plats, new preliminary plats, the number of new construction of single-family homes, and then from there we begin to do the analysis to determine, are we meeting the densities that are outlined in our zoning codes? So for example, in the R3 zone, we allow for lot sizes of 1 unit for every 7,500 square feet of lot area. Is that what really happening? Is it actually lower than that or higher than that? And as a result of that process, we're going to have a fairly good idea as to how our land use regulations work relative to density. This comes back to the City Council for their review in the fourth quarter of 2020. We will be talking with them about what works and do we need to make any changes to the residential densities in the city. If the council says yes, we do, then we would be looking at some amendments to our zoning code and comprehensive plan in that coming year to implement the policies that the council wants. In addition to that, also at the county level, there's, towards the end of the year, there will be a discussion of the policies. How do the cities and the county develop policies around buildable lands? Are you going to allow for cities to have customized approaches, or does everyone have to have the same standard? Right now, Lakewood and Tacoma have customized approaches. Everybody else has a different standard. So do we make changes or not? And those are some of the questions that will be coming to Pierce County Regional Council for their review later in the year. The Growth Management Coordinating Committee will make recommendations probably towards the middle of or third quarter of 2019, and then forward it on to PCRC. So there's two moving targets. One's about general policy, but another one's going to be very specific to Lakewood. Council has also asked about the efficiency of some of the zones. In the past, in December, for example, we had quite a bit of discussion about the R2 zone, which is a very low density zone, and should it have a higher density. We have foregone any discussion of that until the completion of the buildable lands report. Did that answer your questions?
Well, there is some method to the madness, but I just want to let you know that there is method and madness coming that may be of help to you in your planning purposes.
No, and I appreciate that. And I also appreciate, Mike, your insight in terms of district and boundaries. So we are pretty fluid. The last one we did 2 to 3 years ago. And it's so difficult. We work so hard at having feeder schools to where kids know where they're going to go to elementary, then to a middle school, then to a high school. And we work very hard at trying to create fairness, equity, continuity, and then just the geographic understanding of how that all works. And so it's a very difficult thing. We can be fluid. We certainly can and have done that, but we work so hard at not disrupting our community, our children, their families, in terms of the paths that they've set up. And so sometimes they even have expectations that if I live in this area, I'm going to go to that school. So then when you then turn around and do different boundaries, it's very complicated. So we don't turn that ship quickly. We make sure that we really roll it out with the community, work with them, get their input. And it has to be done, and it's really never fun when you do it. So all the information's helpful. And then I know we make projections sometimes for growth, and then that can be difficult too, because when you put a school building up, it's pretty permanent. It's got a 50 to 70-year lifespan. So we're trying to be very strategic and wise in how we do that.
Well, I agree, and hopefully the capacity analysis will help in that regard. Hopefully It's like throwing a little bit of a...
It's clarity anyway.
Yeah.
Marty, I'd like to add that I don't want to walk away from the human side of school boundaries. Families love their school, and moving a boundary, people are very territorial and they want their kids going to school. It's a very emotional, it's probably the most, in all the years I've done this board work, it's probably the most emotional issue that we've dealt with. And so it has to be done correctly, and it does take time. And we need to make sure that everybody has a very clear understanding that no child will, we want to make sure they're transported the shortest amount of time to their nearest school, is their capacity. And people hold on to near and dear, well, this is my school. I want to go to my school. So it's a difficult move to make. And we do have to make sure there's a really emotional toll to it. And that's factored in to the process. It has to be done. We know it has to be done, but it has to be done correctly.
I could appreciate that human aspect, having been the victim of it early in life. So hopefully we can add some, if not clarity, at least some prism with which to view the future of Lakewood development. In Puyallup, they did exactly the only thing they could do, but it was as disruptive as you could get. In 1968, Puyallup High School was in the center of the valley, and they had 2 main junior highs east and west. Made a lot of sense. It's all in the valley. All the growth started to happen on South Hill. So when Rogers, the new high school, was built, the high school boundary essentially went east to west, and so it divided it north and south. So those first year, the junior highs split evenly. Half of east and half of west went to each school. So that was probably as disruptive as you could get as far as the way it was divided, and it created a huge amount of turmoil. So
Yeah, we got to take care of our families and our students.
yeah, I found out about May that I was going to the other high school. Anything further from Mr. Buer? Thank you. We now move to Woodbrook property update with Alyssa Anderson-Pearson, who I've never had to give permission to speak before.
That's true. So for the Woodbrook property update, we are under contract and the anticipated closing date is spring 2019. The potential buyer is currently doing their due diligence, and there's a few challenges that have popped up, and we are working through those. One is the zoning, which we had just discussed, so we're waiting on the city for that. And then also, they found out that there's an existing sewer line that's owned by JBLM that goes through the property. It wasn't on the city maps that we know of, nor was it on our maps. So that was a surprise to everyone. So they're working on that as well. But we are able to continue to lease the property through July 2020. That was part of the agreement as well. So, because we're waiting for the new middle school, obviously, to be built. So that was all part of the agreement. We had a lot of good offers, but this was the best one, and now we're just working through it. Are there any questions?
Any questions? Mr. Branstetter.
So on the existing sewer line, is it an actual operating sewer line, or is it just an easement of a former sewer line?
No, it looks like it is an existing one, and maybe Rick Ring might be better to discuss it.
When you say that there's a challenge, is that something that the SSMCP could be of assistance to the parties involved in trying to come to an accommodation, or have they gotten involved?
JBLM staff is working on it. Last I heard from them a week ago was that they think that they'll have it worked out really quickly.
Oh, well, that's good.
Mr. Bulkey. Not yet.
We good.
There it goes. Just a quick question then. So whoever you're working with, there's the existing school site plus at least the one additional parcel that we just talked about, CPA 4. That's part of the proposal for this group or whoever's.
Yeah,
okay.
So it's dependent on the zoning as well.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So that additional parcel is part of the deal. Okay.
Is this Panattoni, the buyer? No, somebody else? I just wondered who the buyer was. It's
IPT, the acquisition firm from Delaware. Black Creek out of, I believe they're out of Delaware and an office in Colorado as well.
So it sounds like you'd anticipate a logistics center?
Yes.
That's what they do?
There's actually we own 3 parcels out there, and they plan on buying them all. The contract calls for all of them. There's a little bit of an issue with the taxing parcels right now, with the sewer one. We have 3 pieces of the parcel. So there's a big parcel and then a 5-acre and a 5-acre.
Mr. Woodbrook.
Just a follow-up comment, because I really did appreciate some of the barriers and restrictions that you have to work with as a city in the Growth Management Act. And so then you take a piece of property and that used to be R1 or R2 or whatever, and now it's industrial, and now you have those people, and you have to try to configure out where they could go and grow. We're wrestling with that too, just because of the Woodbrook community and how that impacts Tillicum. So it really is a difficult, holistic problem. So it's not even just about the school and the property, but it's about the community there. And we think that we might be able to continue to collaborate with you to understand how to best and most positively impact the community, the real people, the kids, the students, and the impact that could have on Tillicum Elementary as well. So those are areas where we're going to have to work together going forward in knowing how to educate and create, as where you were saying, that sense of that hub of the school is significant. So now that school's gone, but there's still a lot of people there. And then a lot of those people were attending Tillicum would have elementary. So how does that all work? So I just want you to know that that is on our radar screen as well. We're looking at possibilities of how to approach that. And so that's in the process, and I think that'd be another area where we can partner and work together.
Anyone else? Thank you. Mr. Whalen.
I assume then Tillicum Elementary is on the plan at some point to have a redo.
How is that cookie?
Yeah, I might go get one.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, they're nice cookies. Thank you for the cookies, team.
So
the answer is yes. Go ahead.
So we do have a subcommittee that's working on a capital facility planning proposal. So we'll be bringing that back to the board end of February for kind of a first look at that, and that would include many of the schools that need to be looked at, including Tillicum.
Right.
And you can go through the rest of the schools from Custer and Dower and Tye Park, and the in-town schools are all pretty old, the elementary schools, Lockburn. So it will include most of those. So that's Director Wagaman and Director Kelsey that are working with us on that initial stage. So there's a lot of work there on that, but that comes from the facility advisory group that reported to the board about a year ago, 2 years ago today, 2017. So we'll be starting with that work and then making a proposal off of that.
I'm not sure how it might fit into the mix of it all, but in the aspect of trying to maximize the stewardship of the public's resources, as you may know, we have put some money down to buy some land in Tillicum for the benefit of a future Tillicum library, and working collaboratively in a joint use way with the library district. So that just may be something to think about as the facilities folks are working on their project. How can we do some joint use work with regard to that facility that will hopefully be built if the library gets a bond passed down the road and all that sort of thing. But again, it's an opportunity for us to think outside the box and maximize the utility for the taxpayer.
So it's a great thought, and the partnerships are something that worked well in Lakewood. You know that. The city manager and I have talked about exactly the concept of library, how that works in which areas. We've got a ton of work to do to figure that out. But certainly, partnerships make sense.
But at least we have time. We don't have a ton of money, but we have a little bit of time. So.
Anyone else? All right. Well, thank you. We'll move to an update on the new middle school construction with Board Member Jacobs.
Hi, it is a very exciting time in Clover Park because we do have the opportunity now to in fact be building another school. This one will be combining both Mann and Woodbrook, building this new middle school on the Mann Middle School existing property. As per board policy, the district will go through a naming process, which hasn't begun yet, so we don't know what that looks like at this point. Our architect is Ming & Associates from Seattle, and our general contractor, construction manager, is Corsmo Construction, so we are at least having more of a local force do our building for us. The design capacity for this building is 850 to 950 as they are combined. The early site work, including installation of new water main, was completed the summer of 2018. So we have been moving dirt. Things are happening as you drive by Mann. You will see obviously construction going on. Keep in mind that school is happening there on the campus, so the school is still being used, just like we did at Hutloff. You build here, and then as the school gets completed, you move over and the fields get changed around. So we did not have to have a purchase of any new lands that we're using on existing property. Official groundbreaking ceremony was held October 22nd, 2018, and it was a very exciting, as both Woodbrook students and Man School students were represented. They were actually part of the program, so that really was the very beginning of joining forces so that the kids will become one school from their two different schools. Concrete work is in progress. The structural still, it's like once that framing goes in, that will be starting the spring of 2019. And the opening of our school will be August of 2020. And you certainly will all be getting notices for that groundbreaking, for our opening school. It'll be 132,000 square feet. The construction budget is $54,500,000. And we have total budget project. We have $51 million is local CPSD funds, $22 million is state funding, and 73 is part of our 73 million is the total budget. One of the things that's very exciting about our Woodbrook project, we did not have to go out with a bond for this. We are doing this because of incredibly great budgeting and capital fund money, so that we are able to actually do this without going out to our citizens for another tax raise, another bond issue. So we're very proud of it. So Woodbrook, the new Woodbrook Man, as it's being called, it's happening. Any questions?
Questions, Mr. Brandstetter?
When the concept was being surfaced, there were some concerns about fences and property lines and easements that involve the road behind the school, behind the back fence. And I know that the neighbors there came to the city looking, and we deferred all of that to the school district and your folks doing that. But I'm wondering if we clarified that and understand where it looked like there had been maybe some uses of some property that property owners had been using that was actually school district property for a while, and they thought they had a formalized easement from someone, and I just never got an idea of how that actually got resolved.
Well, first, thank you very much. If somebody comes to City Council on school issues, thank you very much for sending them to us, because we can't answer those questions if they don't come to us and we don't hear from them. Rick, I'm going to defer that to you. You may have more information on that.
Yes, we were aware of some people that had some concerns. There were encroachments by property owners, and we went in and cleaned up some of it by new movement. There may still be some stuff that's existing out there that we're working through the construction process. By law, we can't deed people our property, but we can find a way to work with them and mitigate some of their concerns. And part of the plan is it does give them a lot of paths and some access points that was their biggest concern. But some of the people want some drive accesses and stuff like that, which they won't have.
So is there, I think I remember the spot from softball games years ago. Because you parked in the back and snuck on. Is there legal access? Does the school district have legal access from that road?
I think so.
There is, I can't answer that on the top of my head. There is a walkway in between that provides citizens access into that area. But I don't know if there's a legal easement or what the legal easement would be around.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I walked over the same path, and so I know exactly what you're talking about. So anyway, it is exciting. I think we have prototype pictures in the district of what this building is possibly going to look like. It's going to be a very exciting time for our students, and certainly like our other schools, it'll be a state-of-the-art facility, and our students will have every opportunity for some pretty exciting learning.
Any other questions? And we do appreciate that sales tax revenue.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I don't know of any other school. I mean, we're very pleased and proud to be able to say we built this with existing funds without having to go back out. That's quite a coup, I think, for our budgeting department to be able to do that.
And that doesn't include the revenue from Woodbrook necessarily, right? Which is great.
No.
It's really good.
Yeah. Spread the word.
So we'll move to a CELT update with Board President Schaefer.
Yeah, I want to acknowledge the amazing opportunity we've had as a community to have the school district and the city leaders in the community be more involved. I've appreciated so much getting to know Jason better, and Jason, your contributions to CELT has been fantastic, as has Police Chief Mike Zarro and others. It's been truly collaborative. What was interesting is that there's a lot of type A people on CELT. It kind of worked. We didn't know that going in because you don't think that way. But we actually had to slow down to speed up. And at one point, one of the leaders in CELT, she said something that really struck a chord with all of us, and it struck us at the heart. She said, we're trying to develop things for the community without first being community. And she said, until we're community, what are we really going to bring to the table to help community? And it was just such a right thing. And at that point, all the nice type A said, you know what, we need to slow down and really come to a place of understanding one another. And so we, as you know, we have many different people, groups, and leaders represented on that CELT team. And I just think that was one of those things where the trajectory was changed in the right direction. And so we met for several months developing how it is that we can work with the different agencies in our community to ensure that there's a caring adult in the life of each child, and that we're doing it for the passion point of imagine what a child could achieve if he or she felt fully supported by a community committed to his or her success. That's what drives us every time we meet. So in that process, you may be aware of, we ended up breaking it down to 5 different subcommittees to do more specific work. And so one of the work that we decided in enabling a caring adult to be in the life of each child is we looked at it and said, the school's going to need to be very responsible in being able to set up students for success, for student growth, for achievement, for socio-emotional learning, for overall success. And likewise, we need to make sure that our community is setting up children for success, and that we have the healthiest environment that we can create so that we feel great about our community, because we know that our community is one of the forefronts of reinforcing what takes place in the life of a real human being. In this case, you're a child before you're a student. And so we wanted to make sure that we were hitting both angles with that CELT. And so the 5 groups, the subcommittees that we created, one was what we called a build team, which is looking at how to create the capacity for a caring adult in the life of each child. So if you have 12,789 students, how do you start moving to create caring adults in the life for each one of those? And so it was interesting to have that subcommittee look at very diverse ways of accomplishing that task. And so our CELT will meet tomorrow night to start reviewing some of the suggestions that build team came up with. And then we have what was called a reinforce team, where that was a team that said, what can we do to really strengthen families, parenting, those areas where you have a caring adult in the life of a child? What can we do more to really set those families in that community up for success? And then we had what we called was an indirect or a peer-to-peer team, which is we recognize that it may be very difficult to get up to speed in terms of the caring adult in the life of each child. So what can we do to make sure that we're tapping into this incredible resource called students, to where students then bring a positive voice into the life of other students? So that was another aspect of it. And then we had what we called the intervention team, which is we just have to acknowledge that we have a lot of individuals in our community and students who are struggling financially, and we have 6% of our students are homeless. And so when you start doing that math, it's amazing of some of the difficulties that we just face and that families face and the school district and the community faces. So what can we really do to start working together as a community to support these individuals and move them forward and setting them up for success? And so that team gave some recommendations as well. And then one of the teams that I think has the best opportunity to be completely collaborative, because at our last meeting that we had, and I really do appreciate when we get to have our joint meetings, and I know it's effort on everybody. Thank you for cookies, coffee, setting this up, and going the extra mile so that we can meet together and be collaborative. I think it's important. And at our last meeting, we said one of the areas we felt that the city said you'd like to see us increase our capabilities in was the area of communication. And you looked at it and said maybe there's some ways that we could do some cross-communication even. You have your list, you have your people, we have our spheres of influence. How can we put those together? Well, the fifth team is the communication team for CELT. And they're looking at ways to not only disseminate information across this amazing, diverse city that we live in, but also what I appreciate the most is they're going the whole extra step. So they're flipping it. It's not just sending out information to all these different people groups, but it's now being inclusive and going to these people groups and making sure that they have a platform to share what's important to them, because a lot of times we haven't seen their voice really activated. And Marie, you had suggested about the neighborhood associations. We've been doing that for years, just so that you know. Our school district has people that attend the different neighborhood associations because we genuinely want to hear those voices. And so now this communication team, they're going to give us some ideas of how we can be more effective in that. So quite frankly, you might see that I didn't even realize it, but I'm so excited about it that I sit up straight when I talk about it. It's just a great opportunity for us to do something significant as a community and as our schools, truly collaborating and rolling up our sleeves and doing things together. So we'll have 3 more meetings as the original CELT team. They'll bring recommendations on how it should and could move forward, and we're excited to find out. So thank you again for, because I see people in this room that are on that CELT team, so thank you very much.
Questions, comments? Ms. Moss.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You know, one of the things that I noticed about our city and our community and our citizens, we all trying to do what's best for our community, and there's little pockets all over the place. If we could just connect those, because when you talk about caring adults, how is that different from Lakewood's Promise? You see what I'm saying? Yeah. We need to find a way to connect and utilize the resources that's available to us. That's not going to cost us a lot of money and stuff. So it's just something that I've run into in my process of doing the things that I do. And it's a lot of people have the same ideas that each one of us have, and they've got a little pocket here, a little pocket there, but we need to find a way to connect that.
And that's called the build team, and you're absolutely correct. So all I can say is nod my head and say yes. And the caring adult in the life of each child, it really isn't quote unquote different than that, because it's the right mission. So we don't have to reinvent a mission, but it is very much at the heart tied to imagine what a student could achieve if he or she really felt supported by a community that was committed to his or her success. So that's the other piece that we're adding to that. But we know that students are first children, and that we all need adults investing in our lives, whether those are mentoring and how that all works out. They'll have more facets that, as you heard on the reinforced team and then on the peer-to-peer or indirect team, it's more than just a caring adult, but it's also reinforcing some of those other pieces.
Can I add also, to answer your question about the pockets, one of the things that was done very deliberately is when we set up the 12, and we've also set out a second ripple. Now we're at a second tier of people inputting with CELT. We have the director of the Lakewood Promise working with us so that there is nobody being left out. Nobody's having their foot stepped on. To be collaborative, we have to do that. And people are, it was very interesting because well, we already do that. And then we had the conversations about, well, what would it look like if it was, and we talked about the whole community, and the buy-in was incredible. So we have the Lakewood Promise at the table with us just because of that. We try to get every pocket involved, every group that's there involved, so that everybody has a say and everybody is at the table. So that's a different sort of way of, that's doing things a little bit differently, all for the same purpose. Is that fair?
Well, it seems like you have, with nearly 13,000 students, you have a mentor recruiting deficit that is monumentally more problematic than anything the Army has to counter these days as far as recruiting. And maybe that's something the city can do when your team decides what its initiative should be. And I'm thinking not only those community groups or the neighborhood associations, but our various boards and commissions, connections, pretty strong connections with service groups and the military. Those are all folks that some people refer to as the grass trips, not the grassroots. And when you start layering down the grass tips, are the folks that might not be in the newspaper or be the president of Rotary or something, but they're people who have community influence and contacts and can help recruit those folks. And I know not only how difficult it is to recruit and retain, but how it takes time to connect with those students.
But can you imagine the power if the city council truly put the city on the map as also being a part of that mentoring thing, and the school was aligned with the mentoring thing, if we truly made that a citywide project? The effects could be incredible.
I spent a lot of lunch hours on the Tacoma's Hilltop in a Rotary program, and the lower grades are pretty successful, but I never will forget the middle school kid who halfway through the year looked at me and said, "Why do you keep coming back? They don't pay you for this, do they?" Yeah. "They told me you're a lawyer, right?" I said, "Yeah." "Why do you keep coming back?" And once that connection was made, the second half of the year went great. The first half of the year, there was absolutely no progress whatsoever because he didn't expect anybody to come back the next year because he hadn't had a caring adult in his life.
A caring relationship.
Yeah.
Thank you. Comment if I could.
Mr. Whalen.
I just want to thank Director Schaefer and Jacobs for the invitation to be part of the CELT committee. I know for myself, perhaps for Chief Zarro, coming into it as a type A person, it is a little challenging. I have to say to the city manager, the food did help to create a sense of community, Mr. Caulfield. These guys know how to do it right, okay?
Yes.
But we did create a sense of community, and from kind of an amorphous, a bit of frustration from a type A perspective, I think we are getting to some action steps that are real, and that will be something that I think the community can really get excited about and engage as we flesh it out, and put, as we talked a little bit about, a little meat on the bones so we can define it, touch, see, feel it a little bit better. But there are some exciting components to it, and it wouldn't have happened but for the call to action, so I appreciate you guys putting that out there. So more to come.
Absolutely.
Anything else on that subject? Well, thanks for the update. That's great. Now move to district safety. Board Member Kelsey.
I guess I don't have to hold it. Okay, well, we have made a lot of safety progress as of late, and I'm excited to share it with you. In our district, we have a multi-phase approach. Oh, sorry. And I speak softly, and I have a cold, so I'm sorry. And we try to align our plan with the best practices and recommendations from the Washington State Risk Management and the Puget Sound Educational Service District. We start with social emotional safety. I think that's, the root. We have mental health and counseling support. We have counselors at our schools. We have psychologists that rotate, and social workers that rotate from school to school where the need is. In the area of intervention, we refer families for outside resources. And then post-vention, crisis response support staff, and students and family. So, oh, I'm looking at the wrong one, sorry. We contract with Greater Lakes for our psychologists, and Military Family Life, or MFLAC, is our support at the base schools, or post schools as I'm used to calling them. Our health services support, we have prevention, or in the area of prevention, we have development of healthcare plans for students with chronic illness. So we work with doctors for specific illnesses, or their pediatricians. In intervention, we collaborate with community health to provide referral and care for students in need of services. We have school nurses that provide ongoing post-event care, and health clinics that are funded by DoD funds. Let's see here. So moving on to the physical infrastructure safety. We have protocols in place at schools. We have school drill schedules for each school, mapping that go to our rapid responders so that they have a map of each school with the entry points and hallways, so that if there's an incident, they already have the map in place and they can look at it before they're even on site. Safety and security systems, we've made a lot of updates there. We have buzzers and cameras and card access. Let's see here. So we've worked at a lot of schools with the buzzer access. We have vestibules, so which is an area in between so there's like a first door, and they'll buzz in, and then they come in, sign in, and then they're let in to the school, but the rest of the doors will remain locked on campus during that until the person is cleared and allowed in. Put up a lot of fencing, and back to that, it just establishes our boundaries. It it lets people know where our property is at so that there's more respect there. And just fewer points of access. A lot of our campuses felt pretty open for a while, and I think the fencing has helped with that. It's just limited the points of entry. Communication protocols, we're working on specifically with bullying. We're putting together a pamphlet that will go home to parents so that they can actually learn how to identify bullying instead of, a lot of times it's mislabeled bullying when really it's, just a normal conflict with kids. But there is plenty of bullying, and it's just a way they can learn to identify it. And the next steps to take on our website right now, we have already active a place where they can click and report bullying, and then it goes to the right person quickly, and it can be dealt with at a lower level before there are larger problems. Our security support includes SROs. We have 4 right now. I believe we have 1 at Clover Park, full-time, 1 at Lakes, and then we have 1 that goes between Hutloff and 1 that rotates between Hutloff and Mann, okay. And then another 1 that rotates between Lockburn, Woodbrook, and Harrison Prep. So those are our SROs right now. But we also have campus supervisors who have special training. They're classified staff, and they're on, I believe, every campus. Is that right? We have, or just the secondary? Okay. So secondary, we have the campus supervisors, and they're trained to identify certain things. drills we have, or going back to our drills, forgot to mention, we do drills for earthquakes, fire, and then I wanted to mention that and forgot. It was what's the third one?
Lockdown schools.
Lockdown drills. So, and the kids and staff are all part of those drills. And then the staff go through other drills for active shooter in the case of that. So then we have shelter-in-place safety pods that are already in some of our schools. I believe we have 2 in Oak Brook already? Oak Brook. So just Oak Brook? Okay. And that's just, is that because of the way Oak Brook is set up?
Yeah, it's an open concept school, and so we are actually piloting 2 of those pods to ensure that that's the system that we need to go to. So we're looking at that.
So during the drill, they can practice going into that pod, and then it goes into complete lockdown where they're protected if there were an incident. And then it's also functional every day as like a tutoring area or a reading nook. It actually looks pretty cozy. I saw a picture of it. So it's not intimidating. It's not scary. The kids don't have to like look at it and be afraid. So we have preparedness, planning, training. We're always, we have lots of ongoing training. And we're just very thankful to have a strong partnership with our Lakewood Police and Fire departments. We just feel very supported. We've talked at great length with them about, any kind of incidents and how quickly they can be there. They're just very supportive. Any questions?
Questions? Mr. Whalen.
And a topical issue du jour is the issue of measles outbreaks out in Clark County. And I raised the issue, I know there was an email that came out, I think today on this. Maybe we can just have a little bit of an overview on where the district is in terms of ensuring compliance with public health. As a recipient of an automatic notice of expulsion for my own daughter, for a shot card, apparently it wasn't updated. Where are we on that?
Oh, no.
Yeah. My daughter was expelled. I had like a day to get back up.
So where are we? Want to go ahead?
Yeah.
Or I'll let Doug do that. But I know a letter did go out today, an email. I got it also.
Yeah.
So we do have a normal immunization process in place for every student that comes into the district. We expect them to show their immunizations and go through that process. There is an opt-out that parents have for that for several reasons. And when that happens and we have an outbreak, those are the students that are excluded first because they're most at risk, right? And they put others potentially at risk. So the measles piece you got today, as you saw, came at Pierce County's advice, and we certainly didn't disagree. We've been watching it in the newspapers like you probably have. But again, as kids register into school, they go through the immunization paperwork that's required before they can get to school. There's some exceptions always, but again, we know which kids are immunized, which they're not, and sometimes it takes some of them a little while to get every step done. So there's some things when they first enroll.
Right.
Yeah.
I learned about that.
Ms. Barth.
Okay.
Thank you. So, Ms. Kelsey, on the issue of bullying, just going to go back to that. Some of the comments that I hear from the youngsters talk about bullying and what the procedure is that they go through to report it. And then some of the youngsters felt in the conversation that I had with them that was that there was no action. So that they felt that they had brought the issue, told the issue, and then nothing happened. So I was wondering, have we done a follow-up, or have you done a follow-up meeting? Because I know last year you set up some periodic meetings with the youth council and the school board. I wondered if you had done any more joint meetings with them, or do they have a liaison that comes and talks to you or anything? Okay, no?
So I wasn't part of the meetings last year. I know that there were some that were held. There's been no meetings that I know of with youth council representatives. I would tell you that our high schools are reaching out within their campuses. I know, for example, Lakes has just had a different type of youth council. And part of this came from the CELT and other pieces as well, is we're trying to get to a better cross-section than sometimes we get. Often kids who volunteer are kids who are doing well in school and very successful in school, and we have a cross-section of kids that are successful in different ways, right? Sure. So we're now working to, and Lakes is a great example, they're just kicking a different piece off of getting that way to listen as well as share. And there's clearly more we can do there around bullying, but around a host of things. So that's at least one piece, and there's more going on in many of the secondary schools as well. We could share at another time, perhaps, the depth of that. The bullying piece, though, we recognize, and we've been working on, I'm just going to add on if I can, Ms. Kelsey, that all of our staff are trained every year on their responsibilities in bullying. We have assemblies, we have classroom training that our students go through. Our staff know that if any of them are told about bullying, they're required to report it onto their principal, whether that's someone in food service, the bus driver, the teacher, the superintendent. We're all responsible to make sure that report is moved on to principals, and principals know that they're responsible to investigate that appropriately and take action. Now, having said that, if you report someone else being bullied, you may not be told what happened about all that, right? Because then we get into confidentiality issues with all of our students that we have to be cautious about. So there's probably more questions, but I'm going to stop there so I don't share things that aren't pointed to your...
I think that's good, and I'm glad that you're taking those other avenues. I just would just ask you to look at the resource that you have within the youth council. Those kids are fabulous. I mean, they're coming out of our school district. Mm-hmm. They're some bright, independent thinker, type A personalities, perhaps. But don't lose touch with them, I guess, is what I'm asking you to do. They heard that they had a commitment from the school board to have somewhat regular meetings, and I think that maybe that should be pursued. It's just an observation.
Marie, if I could just add one other thing on that. When we have an opportunity to work with those students, there's processes in place. And certainly they can always come and reach out to a school board member, but the process that works best for us, and certainly when a parent calls me or someone calls me, is the first place they need to go is to the individual teacher. If they don't get resolution there, they need to go to the principal of that building. And if they have no resolution there, they need to go to our superintendent. And then if the superintendent doesn't respond, then the next action is to come to us as a board. And that's a process. So I think what we need to do is we need to spend more time teaching our young people and our parents what to do. So we as adults right here in this group, when we have someone touch us and say, oh, isn't it awful that this is happening? Say, oh, thank you for sharing that with me. Have you done this? Have you done this? And we need to redirect them in that way, and then follow up with them again. Call them up and say, did you do that? I've tried to do that with parents, because they want to come to the board. But what happens is if I get too involved as a board member, if it finally comes to the board for action, then I have to recuse myself. So I want them to use the right process, and we're certainly willing to do that. Mr. Wolke.
We'll get it right one of these months. I just wanted to mention on the mental health side, I know you've got some counselors in the schools, but the youth council did mention as part of this overall discussion that they rotate, that they're not always, they felt like there's perhaps not enough. I don't know where you get that funding from to hire is it Greater Lakes people that you put in
So the Greater Lakes funding predominantly comes from levy funds, which are, as you know, going down with the new funding piece.
Right.
We do have some, I believe, some Department of Defense funds that go into some of the Greater Lakes support. I would start, though, by telling you we have a full-time counselor in every building. And in our secondary schools, more than one, because they're bigger, obviously, right? So our high schools are 4 per building, yeah, at the major high schools. So, but their jobs is not mental health counseling. That's a different type. It's more of an academic, a little bit of social and emotional counseling. The Greater Lakes and then the military family life folks on base are looking at more mental health intervention, if you will. And at the same time, we're not set up to be psychiatric hospitals, right? We have some kids with real needs, and we're working hard to reach out there, but we're still not at that far end of service either.
Right. I'd like you to be aware that this is going to be an ongoing issue, right? Not with the city. This actually, and we won't be involved because we're not going to provide funding, but as funding comes available, perhaps from some other streams at the county level or at the state level, one of the things that you're probably going to get asked is this something you'd be interested in doing rather than spending it on the back end? There's going to be some push to try to spend mental health dollars on the front end, and that includes the schools.
Back to the kind of the physical security side. I have 2 mental pictures in my mind. One is the Idlewild, where some of my kids went, which is the 1950s California model where there's access everywhere. And the other end of the scale is, I was not too long ago out at Evergreen, which is built to on-base standards, which tried to eliminate soft targets. How do you retrofit or harden, so to speak, these antiquated designs? I heard an example of there were pods at one school. But what do you do to someplace like Idlewild to make it less accessible to somebody randomly coming in off the street?
Great question. So Tye Park is probably the school that's the closest to what we're trying to get to, in that the site is now fenced. Now, we could argue whether it needs to be a 6-foot or an 8-foot fence, but it's fenced. So you have to make an active piece to get over it. And we just fixed, I believe, a problem with the fencing where you could reach into the side of the fence and open it, which is some of those things with construction, right? So we've got a plate there, but the concept is there to get into the office and to access the rest of that open campus. You have to buzzer into the office, show ID. Didn't bring mine with me, but you'd have to get your driver's license if you went in. There you go, Mr. Wagman. So you'd show that, the secretaries would let you in there, and then they'd let you into the rest of the facility. That's the conceptual frame with Idlewild. Idlewild is set up for this summer, Mr. Ring, to be completed. And there, if you can look at that, if you see that site in your head, we've got to put a different door going into the office from the outside. So the gate would be inside, and they'd probably be going through, well, the outside where, you know where that office door is now? So if the structure is this way, it's on the inside. So we've got to change the way that people come into the office. So you come in one door and then get inside the gate on the other, right? So that's the concept. As we build it out over time, the hope is, well, the piece there I know because I've seen it, there's a panic button there that the secretary would be able to hit that would alert the schools of a problem. In the best case, that's a real old building. In the best case, over time, we'd have those doors and on all of those outside pods electronically lock. We're not there yet, because you can imagine the issue with that with old buildings. But right now, we're just trying to harden so we can give Chief Zarro and his folks the 2 to 4 minutes that they will take to get there. That's all that hardening does. It doesn't take care of the kids inside the building that are socially, emotionally in trouble, right? That's the other part of it. So I digress, but that's the concept, is just harden it enough to get the police at the time to get there. Our staff know what to do during that time to try to gain time to hide with their kids, to run if they can with their kids. If you're on the playground, you don't go back into a building that's in trouble. You go someplace else. So I'll stop there and you can follow up.
Oh, thank you.
The district is doing lots of training with staff in buildings, the worst case scenario what ifs. So for the Idlewilds and Tye Parks, the staff is being trained.
I was appropriately a dummy in active shooter training at the old Lake City before it burned down, and I was an unidentified bogey inside Bulldogs. They were supposed to. It's a good role. Yeah, it took no training experience or intelligence, so I was assigned.
Mr. Mayor, I think the one thing that when we talk about this whole safety issue, that the probability of having something happen in one of our schools is very, very low, like almost nil. The sad thing is if something does happen, it's going to be chaos for all of us. And so this group of people sitting around this table here have lots of responsibilities if something would happen, as far as making sure we're clear in our communication to our community and all those things. I mean, we've all had the opportunity to watch other communities go through this pain. And, so we need to make sure that we communicate professionally, we communicate clearly, that we're talking back and forth. But I can tell you, we as a school board have worked with our staff, and Rick Ring and his team have looked at all our buildings, and we're going through piece by piece, as our superintendent had just shared, of making sure they're as hardened the best we can. I mean, some of our designs, it's not easy, and most of us have military experience. You'd like to have a nice perimeter. We don't have that. You look at Lockburn in particular, the way that campus is laid out. It's difficult, but I can tell you that within the district, we've got a team that's worked that. We've had multiple briefings on this, and we're continuing to work, because I think we owe it to the community that we've done our due diligence, and we're working very hard to do that.
Ms. Barth.
Very quick question. Who's authorized to call for?
So normally the principal authorizes a lockdown. Now, if the principal's not there, there are others that are in that position to do it. Not every staff member can call a lockdown, but we have procedures in place where that doesn't take 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 2 minutes. It goes real fast. Most of the lockdowns we get now, other than drills, are because our LPD has activity going on in the area, right, and appropriately done. And that's a call to our office, and then they put a building in lockdown.
So if LPD calls and says, we have a situation, and they're talking to the clerk?
The clerk knows how to operate with that very rapidly.
Okay,
as far as I know, there's not a delay. I've not heard of any delays in that response that I'm aware of.
Sure. Mr. Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My colleagues up here on the council know me as the devil's advocate. And what is the devil? And as I've listened to this very good conversation tonight, and I really appreciate your comments and yours, Dr. Schaefer, there is an irony here that is being worked out. I heard it said, and I wrote it down, until we are community, we can't be community. And yet our schools sound like prisons, with access points, sally ports, ID cards. You get the picture. We can't be community until we are a community, but we can't let people use vacant school land as a playground in their neighborhood, which is something that Councilmember Barth brought up. I'm not poking fun, I'm not poking fingers, but and I mean it's the people in this room, it's the people outside this building, we have to remember that irony here. Because in some ways, and maybe this is the role that the devil here has tonight, we have to work against and toward that challenge. We want a community. And yet at points, it kind of runs the other way. So I say this in all due respect, because I quoted you, in all due respect to the board members here of the Clover Park School District and to the public. And we've got public right out here tonight. And boy, I see some of these guys in neighborhood association meetings every single time. So that was brought up. They're there. I know they're there. But we've got to keep that in mind, that there is an irony at work here. And we would do well to remember that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Branstetter.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, I think we've covered that topic pretty well. It's the horse is pretty dead, but it was a good discussion. But I would like to ask a little bit about a more likely safety issue, if not as severe, and that's regarding drivers. And we have a lot of sort of infrastructure of where we've got school speed zones, and we have there are rules about how to drive around school buses and things to that. Particularly around that, I mean, what do you hear from your school bus drivers about how safe the rest of the drivers are with respect to being able to transport kids safely? And I will also say that I do appreciate the fact that the school board joined with us in our efforts regarding the Point Defiance bypass Amtrak concern that we share. But so many kids get transported to and from school that I'm wondering, do we have the good systems and good information to the public to ensure safety in that period of time?
Well, we could take more time and do some research to get feedback from our bus drivers. It would be interesting to say how they feel about the overall.
Well, I'd certainly, if there's some feedback, and while I'm curious, I think the feedback might be more actionable by the police chief. If there's something that the school bus drivers can observe in terms of driver behavior, that maybe there is a way to do something corrective.
I feel like you may have been talking to my wife or something, because she's always telling me I need to be a nicer driver, so I'm feeling very convicted right now. But I hear you. You know, it is interesting. I think that getting back to John's really good comment, I want you to know I heard you, and I appreciate, and I appreciate it, because a lot of people feel very vulnerable right now. And when you're in community, you shouldn't feel vulnerable. You should feel like people have your back and you're shoulder to shoulder. So it is so hard to be able to navigate our way through that. And so I can tell it is going to take all of us doing that together. It's going to take more than just an approach of safety. It's going to take an approach of, I really want to know you. I really want to get to understand you. I really want to be able to feel like we have trust with each other. And so that's one of those things that is difficult to build, but being vulnerable is not that enjoyable. And for those of us who went through schools at a less volatile time, we didn't have to do that. And so we do have to work harder at it. And so I just want you to know I appreciate what your comment.
Mr. Bulkey.
I do want to follow up on the school bus comment. Have you considered the school bus light, the warning cameras that Bethel is using?
Ask the question again, I'm sorry.
The school bus cameras that Bethel is using for people who run past the stop sign.
So we do have school cameras in our buses. You're talking about exterior cameras.
Correct. These are for when drivers fly by.
Had no conversation that I'm aware of with that, Mr. Ring.
Yes, we've actually had some conversations with our transportation department, and when I asked for data on stop arm violations, nobody could produce anything. So we're not having that problem being reported by our bus drivers.
It's actually very encouraging between traffic enforcement and a more urban environment. It may be significantly different here than it is out in Graham. Where, yeah. I know I've seen them, although I did have somebody get irritated at me the other day when I stopped on. Yeah. Any other issue, anything else regarding safety? Well, then we'll move to potential joint use agreements for facilities and fields. Mrs. Dodsworth's been patiently waiting.
Good evening. Thank you so much. We've talked a lot tonight about partnership, collaboration, cooperation, and trust. So this is a great topic to kind of close everything up for your final topic tonight. So the City of Lakewood and the Clover Park School District have worked cooperatively, especially with joint use, for years and years. I've been here for 17 years, and so on the Parks and Recreation side, you know, we have seen that happen. But over the years, you know, we've had new principals, we've had new office staff, custodians, our staff, and so it seems like we're constantly reminding and updating, and people aren't sure how it works. And so one of the things that we started talking about, I think it was a year ago or so, is the possibility of creating a joint use agreement, cooperative use agreement, shared facility use agreement. They're called lots of different things, but they're very common between cities and school districts, towns, park districts and school districts. They're very common. And the purpose for that is to just ensure that there's continuity and consistency because everybody believes in joint use and they understand and its efficient and effective use of our public resources that the citizens have all spent time and money creating. But just to have that arrangement in place so we can use it for training with our new staff, we can use it when we're working with different groups so that there's consistency again in our operations. So we did some research last year and earlier this year. I guess it is early this year. I guess it was last year. But we did some research just to prepare for tonight to have this conversation. We looked at lots of different joint use agreements, and there's plenty out there as samples. And although they're all different, they are all unique to the different relationships that the groups have. There's a lot of common themes in all of them, and typically they start with the purpose, a lot of whereases, because it's a memorandum of understanding, or it's an interlocal agreement or cooperative use agreement. But mainly it's like we're all in it to create, be effective and efficient with our resources. We want to do more together than we can do individually. We want to make it easy for our community to have access to our public facilities, and then just supporting our youth and families so that we can create those communities that you'd mentioned earlier tonight. And how you create communities is giving people an opportunity to gather together, making it easy for that to happen. So that's the purpose. Scheduling, of course, it's done lots of different ways. The school district has a great scheduling process. We have a great scheduling process for our facilities. So we, in talking with our staff that do that work, you know, it makes sense just to continue to do it the way we've always done it, but just to make sure that we all understand what those processes are, how we get in line, how we get to the front of the line, depending on how that works, what forms need to be done, so that we're all working off the same pages. So one person isn't talking to a secretary at a school, or a custodian at a school, or a principal at a school, that we're going through the proper processes. So again, you don't have one thing scheduled there and then you come in and there's a book club or a book fair, you know, talent night. So scheduling is really important because of course that's how you reserve those spaces and utilize them. Fees and cost sharing are always included, and you know, these aren't money makers, they're not money losers. It's really just, and the school district and the city has basically given each other use for free over the years. Anytime there might be a special piece of equipment or a weekend or after hours, or we're asking somebody to do something above and beyond what is there, sometimes is a small cost associated with that. For instance, we realized we're having our Christmas parade and it was growing bigger than it was. So we wanted to use Park Lodge, just the parking lot, on a Saturday. And the school district was great to allow us to utilize that, no problem. We hired the custodian who opened the door to the gym so people could use the bathroom, which was an awesome treat. Custodian was there to supervise the inside. We were there to supervise the outside. 2 hours later, it was done, and it was just a great use, and there was no problem in getting it. Everybody was cooperative in allowing us to do that, and it just added so much ease to the scheduling of a very large event. Things like that. Again, cost, fees, and sharing, those are laid out. So again, everybody's real clear when it's free and it's not, there won't be a charge, but then when there is as well. So again, you know that in advance so that if you're going to build a fee schedule around a league or a program or an activity, you can make sure that those are included in there as well. Terms and renewal, termination, it's all over the board. Some people have them, they created them 50 years ago and they're ongoing every year. They might look at them every 5 or 10 years just to make sure things are moving smoothly, but or some people have annual ones that they talk about it every year. So you would just build in what council and school board thought would be appropriate. Capital improvements, some groups do that as part of their agreement. Some facilities develop joint use of sport fields and things like that, and then they have to figure out how they're going to pay for it and who's going to get first right, who's going to maintain them. Typically, capital isn't something that we do on a regular basis. We have done capital projects together. We've bought soccer fields, given them to the school district. They've installed them. We've used them for after-school program, but the kids get to use them every day for PE. Or again, in 2009, the city and the school district built a park, and it was basically a school park or a community park on a school site. And so then we established hours of operation when they were closed so that you didn't have people just wandering in during the school. Who was going to pay for what? And who's going to maintain that? How do you do replacement? What happens if it's vandalized? And all those things were outlined very clearly. It was a special agreement for that particular project. And that's probably how you would want to manage capital projects because they're not on your regular everyday activity. And then, of course, the liability, our lawyers and risk managers would want to get involved to make sure that we're all, making sure that we're safe and that people are responsible, that you have the right supervision, that you have the right access or lack of access, and then we would just make sure everybody was on board with that. You want to make sure that the facilities are safe. You want to make sure that the participants are safe. You want to make sure that the staff and school feel safe. We heard a lot about safety tonight too, so that's usually built in as well. And then you can add a million things from fee schedules to maps to access points to safety routes. You can do a lot of attachments so that, again, it's an educational piece for those groups that are going to be implementing and using it. So we just wanted to bring it forward. We've been talking about it for a while. We wanted to bring it forth to council and school board to have a conversation. If you thought that that would be something you'd want us to continue to pursue, working, of course, bringing some stakeholders in from both organizations so that we'd make sure that everybody's interests were being met and that all of those different topics were being covered. And then if there was anything special or meaningful to any individual group, that we could make sure that those are added. We can make it be anything we want it to be, but there's lots of examples of how it could be. So just wanted to get that conversation started.
Well, you certainly have, and you did it very thorough. So as you were even speaking, one of the things that I leaned over to the mayor and just asked about the feasibility of doing some of these. Sometimes what we do as a board is we create a subcommittee to be able to look into things a little bit more thoroughly, and then that way we're not just asking the staff to do it, but we're having a board director be aware of it as well and make sure that the intention is there because there's so many details that come about. So I think my suggestion to further this correct conversation is to be able to appoint a board director and a council member, maybe to be on a subcommittee to work with the different individuals to come up with a holistic opportunity to make it happen. So that's what I would suggest, but I don't want to suggest things that aren't in line with the way that the city operates.
We just had a non-quorum discussion and both thought it was a good idea. So all we need is volunteers.
So we have one volunteer on the board side.
Right.
Paul.
I think Mr. Community down there had his hand up.
I get to be the devil, and I would not do everything.
So do we?
Are we in agreement with you two?
No, go for it. Well, and I think that is a good idea, and I know that, you know, I've been doing this board thing for a long time, and I know that we have had practices in the past, and I want to make sure that if we do it, it's done well. I'm very protective of our facilities. They're state of the art, and I want to make sure that I'll maintain, but I want our community to use them, absolutely. So I think it's a very good, positive step. That being said, I know that when we went through our policy book a few years ago, we do have policies and procedures, and we must stay aligned with those. And that's kind of that's our rule book. So we'll work on that. So I think it, you know, as long as we know what the outcome we're looking for and the steps to get there, I think we can have a conversation.
What did we do anecdotally for Martin Luther King Day the other day? That was a perfect example of joint use. What did we follow on?
So let's make the subcommittee do all that work.
Yeah. I'm aware of there's a park on South Hill Heritage Athletic Complex that's adjacent to Rogers High School. And it's a great facility. It's school district property, it's county money, and the underlying agreement is the worst agreement I've ever seen in my life. I mean, because you have to anticipate things that weren't for anybody. It just doesn't have a price in it. But, you know, for example, if we had a city baseball field and a baseball field on school district property that was incorporated in a program that City Parks ran, for example, whose fee schedule controls? Who schedules it? Who maintains it? Who has priority on what times a day? All those things need to be considered, and so it is it goes beyond just simple who puts up the backstop and who's liable if somebody breaks their ankle. There are all sorts of things that need to be considered that are kind of unintended conflicts. So.
Well, and since I'm not an attorney and I don't look at those things first, and one of the things that I know some school districts have done as they've gone into construction, this is conversations at state and national meetings, they'll build a school and the community, the city, will pay for the construction of the playfields. So that's actually a partnership where it's not, you know, so there's lots of things that can be done. I appreciate the time to do it. Give us, you know, we'll time to look at lots of options and then have those conversations.
This is all conversation for the subcommittee.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I guess, is this subcommittee going to look at possible options for the Lake City property? Is that part of this subcommittee, or is this just to do all property? Or is just this is just the use of facilities?
Well, I think it's a possibility of joint use of facilities that aren't underutilized at this point. What about a gymnasium during the summer? You know, I don't know what the schedule is at the swimming pool.
And what costs are, and what are the parameters that both entities are looking for. Those are the conversations.
Let that subcommittee come up with innovative ideas. I think that's great. I hear you.
Okay, because I'm a little confused if we made any progress on the Lake City property.
Pardon?
When we talked earlier, is the Lake City property part of this discussion, or did we agree earlier to it?
Yeah, I would think so, although we'd have to recognize it's interim use.
Okay. Right, exactly, and I think we agree with that. As a council, we've never said, if they're planning to use it in 2 years, my guess would be we're not going to do anything, right? If it's under 10, it's probably a passive use, is my guess. There's 6 other people. But if it's beyond 10 years, then that opens up a number of options for the property, is in my mind. So there's those kind of planning things that we'd have to.
You know what, I think a way to progress would be to have all of the bodies here, you know, create their questions, serve them into the committee so that we can then establish it. That's because I don't think we can solve anything tonight. I mean, it's a good discussion, but those are questions that the committee should certainly look at.
Right.
Mr. Wagner.
I think what we have to remember, this is a citizen's property. You know, we're citizens here, so it's our community property. The problem is that the city council has authority over some, and we have authority over, or the school board has authority over others. So we've got to figure out how to work together, and that's what that committee should do. And from my perspective, it should be every piece of property we have, we ought to have some plan of how to use it. And with your concern about, you know, the property being set aside for a minute, we have a job is to educate our children by the Constitution of the state of Washington of the things we're supposed to do. So we need certain resources to do that. But when those resources aren't being used, can they be used for something else? And my feeling is yes, but that committee will do a job for us. Thank you.
If we have Mr. Devil's Advocate on that, he'll explore all options. Any other questions on that? So, Ms. Dodsworth, can you take the lead on convening that?
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you. That's all we had on the agenda tonight. Are there any further questions, comments before we lead out to an adjournment? Mr. Brandstetter.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. One of the groups that has been extremely supportive of students for many years is Caring for Kids, and they don't have the firmest structure, but they seem to get a lot done going off. And I know that in one of the comprehensive plan amendments that they have moved through tenancy in a variety of school district and non-school district properties where much of what they do has to do with warehousing, and they've had a relationship with communities and schools. But I guess that because we're selling the place that they sort of operate from now, that the couple of inroads that they've made to the city, we haven't really found a good way to assist them with a new base of operations or a place to do that. And I'm wondering, are you in the same situation, or what kind of discussions are we? Because we'd certainly like to keep, you know, we talk about trying to keep volunteers in the community active with our kids, and that's an organization that actually does a pretty good job of that historically. But what does their future look like?
So the American Lake South property will remain accessible to them until the property sale closes. My conversation with Diane is that summer of 2020. After that, she knows that we don't have, that's a huge place. You've been in that facility. That's a lot of square footage there, and she's using most of it. So we're concerned about what happens there as well. But right now, we don't have any space like that where we can just say, go use this space. Others are looking along with us from the school district standpoint. I know we've had conversations with city staff about, and as far as I know, you don't have that big of a space for you know, them either. So it's a great question. We don't see space that we have that we can just say, go move from here to there. Now we're.
Well, I guess that I would ask that the joint use subcommittee, you know, think a little bit broader than just city district use, and look at, are there some joint use for some other valuable community organizations in terms of processes that maybe deserve to be supported by both the city and the district in the event, because the work of that group falls in line with the CELT initiatives and some others. And I'd like to sort of, well, there's not an apparent solution right now, that it would be nice if there is an apparent solution a year from now.
We can both look for that. Is there anything further? Well, I'll go first, and city council session's adjourned.
So I'm looking for a motion to adjourn from seconded by Paul. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Motion carries. Clover Park School District meeting is adjourned as well. Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys. Covered a lot of ground, actually.